Hello guys, welcome to this first video, right, on an introduction of what the Rhinoceros software is, right. Again, this will be an overview, right, basically describing some of the qualities and some of the features that this software has, right. I will be referencing and more or less deriving this introduction off of the Rhinoceros training manual level 1, sort of a brief outline for your reference, right? But the idea is that anyone can use this video to familiarize themselves with what this software has to offer, and more importantly, how to begin using it, right? And familiarize yourself with the features that it has, right? So we will begin right by a basic overview of what this is. And as you can see on my screen, right, I have a model right here that will guide us, and it will take us through a number of observations, right, and comments that I will have. Just a little model that I'll perhaps talk more about it in a minute. And I guess basically, right, the first question, right, and the first point to address is basically what is Rhino, right? And from the conversation or the conversation of other modeling softwares, right, where does this one, right, fall in between the other ones? And it's really interesting how each software, right, has its own unique characteristics. And I mentioned this a lot, right? Any software, it's a tool. So just like any other tool, whether it being digital or analog, right, has qualities and perhaps some limitations. I have mentioned as well how of the gamma of softwares, right, this one in particularly, Rhino, it's used by a number of let's say trades and users, right? I mean, for different purposes versus whether it be in jewelry, architecture, of course, product design. It really is just and I don't want to limit it, but it's a drawing tool, right? Particularly, it's a drawing tool with a number of tools, right? And you will see hopefully through these videos that even though if you're an experienced user, right, perhaps there might be some other things that jump right to mind, because just like learning how to do anything, we might have a specific way of doing things, and then we realize that there's a better or more efficient way of doing the same thing, right? So it's a 3D modeling software, basically, right, a Rhino. And what's different from this, right, is that Rhino particularly, right, works on what's called surfaces, right? Right, let's see this here, right? Each of these guys right there, it's a surface, right? Each of these, you can call them planes, right? Extract surface right there. Let me do that one right there, and I'll show you, right? For me, a really good analogy of this, right, and how to reference is perhaps paper and folding paper, right? By definition, in Rhino world, right, surfaces, which are all of these segments, right, that make up your geometry, but by definition, they're infinitely thin, right? There is no thickness for each of these individual members, right? Now, the way that you actually get thickness, right, out of these surfaces, right, is you join them. What do I mean, right? Well, if I and don't worry necessarily about these comments right there as well, but what do I mean? Well, that if I join this surface, right, and I move it right now from this end to there, and the same right from this end to this other end, right? I achieve the illusion perhaps of a three-dimensional object, but it's really important to know that these objects are void in the inside, right? There is nothing inside of them. And we talked about what's the name of each of these planes, right? Each of these ones, it's a surface, right? So what's it called when you have a number of them, right? It's called a polysurface, right? And if you see right here, right, these are some of your panels that you know guide you through some of your objects, your layers. I will be going more into detail, right? If you don't have them, don't worry about it right now. I'll show you guys how to bring them up right here, right? But what I do want to show you, right, is that the software, right, reads each of these surfaces, right, you know, in that language, right, surface, polysurface, and you can actually see it in here, right? I select that object right there, it's an open polysurface right there. I select that object right there, it's a surface, right? I can maybe type that, select those, join them, right? And then now this changes to a closed surface, closed solid polysurface, right? Because that's what it is, right? And again, it's a lot about the analogy sometimes as well of maybe a container, right, where you can put water, and if it's open, right, it's going to leak, and you're going to hear me say that how sometimes that gives us issue when we're trying to join geometry, etc., etc. Right? So we've gone through some of the object types, which again, the most important ones is the surfaces and polysurfaces. Now, I think I have actually turned them off right here, but you're gonna see that anything that you draw in Rhino, right, has this very particular view, right? And let me turn it on right here. These lines right here, those lines are not necessarily part of the final product, right? I mean, it's not that this little wall has a dust texture, right? These lines right here are what they're called your ISO curves, right? And again, those are some of the lines that the software used in order to construct some of the geometry. And those are very characteristic of Rhino as well. And just know that the potential of this software, it's, whoops, right here, going crazy with my keyboard. The potential of the software, it's pretty incredible. And I mean, I've been using this software for a number of years, right? And I still, right, discover a number of features for them, right? Let's see, 1 second right here. Now, as I was saying, right, it's really fascinating. It's quite fascinating, right? The complexity, right, and the complexity of the calculations that this software does for us, right? And it might be even easy sometimes, easy to overlook that, but I will point that out, and especially if you have some experience drawing by hand, you'll see how definitely we share, or this software has been taught by the human learning and thinking process. All right. So again, as I was mentioning, right, these surfaces are infinitely thin, right? They're also infinitely flexible, right? We're gonna be seeing, right, how we can start getting some complex, right, and even more so than this, right? In this case, there's not so much flexibility or bending, right? We're able to get some curves right there, but even this, right, this could definitely be smoother, and we can then actually get even a round profile here, right? But again, they're infinitely thin, infinitely flexible, and mathematically defined, right? And that's really important as well. You'll see how I have the grid on right there. Again, this bar right here, I'll talk about it more in detail, right? But there's this option right here, right? Or there was, right? But the command for that is F7, right? Right, if you press the button F7, function 7, we're going to be making use a lot of those as well, right? Your function keys. Thought there was a grid on, grid off button right here. But again, F7 will turn it on and off. It's important to see it, right? Because again, all of this is mathematically defined, right? And all of these points, right, have a value, right? And it's important to note that, and that's how we actually communicate with the software. You'll see right here are coordinates, right, on the plane. It's also really important to note, right, that Rhino works on a 3-axis, right? You have your X and your Y, right? You see it right here. That's what defines your top view, right? That's what defines the top view, right, of this object right here. Oops. Right here, right? So that's the bench right there. So you see when I select one object, right, it gets selected or highlighted, right, in all the other windows. Now, this is what's called your multi-view, right? You have your top, your front, and your right. Those are editable, right? You can have as many viewports as you want, right? You can name them whatever you have, you want, and we will go over that later on. Now you see that the default ones, right? If you go right here, 4 viewports, right? If I click right there, right, it gives me those 4 default ones, and by default it centers on the origin, which is that point right there. Now another characteristic you're gonna see on Rhino, right, is your coordinates, as I was talking about, and as you see, right, in each of these 4 viewports, right, it changes. So we have the X and the Y, which defines the top view. We have the X and the Z axis, right, which define this front view, right? And we have the Y and the Z, which define, in this case, the profile, or what sometimes we might refer to as the side view of this object, right? Which is very, very important to note, and it's very, very helpful, especially for someone that is just starting with architecture school. This idea of the multi-views, right? Which again, you know, the term for these, right? They're referred to orthogonal views, right? And we will talk more about what does that mean, right? Orthogonal views. Now, something that is also very characteristic, right, from Rhino, other than seeing your objects, right, how I have them in this way, right? It's a number of other views, right? View styles, right? So again, we talked about the inner curves, right, which are called your iso curves. We also have some profile curves, right, that of course gives us the edge of all of these geometries, right? Now, in order to model and you know, depending on your workflow and your needs and your requirements, right, you need to see certain things. And sometimes you don't need to see certain things, right, of your objects. What do I mean, right? I'm going to go from my multi-view to a single view, right? And you can do that by double-clicking on any of these tabs right there, right? It's my top perspective. I double-click on perspective. I'm back on my multi-view. I'm going to double-click on it, right? And if you click on this drop-down menu, this little arrow to the right of the word perspective, you have this menu, right? Now, the first set of options that we have right here, these are your viewing styles, right? And you'll see that we have wireframe, right? And again, go ahead and play with them, right? And more than playing, right? I mean, familiarize yourself with the graphical qualities of each of these views, right? I haven't gone over navigation yet. I will do that in soon, right? But for right now, right, we can look right at wireframe. And that's our wireframe. And what does that mean? Well, just that, right? We see those curves. Right, we see those, the iso curves and the profile edges right there. But that's it. And we see through the geometry, right, through the objects, which is a pretty neat look. Though sometimes, right, it's really easy, right, to get lost, right? It can be a little bit chaotic. Right? We start losing sense of what's in what plane. Right, so in this case, right, we have that bench right there, which then overlaps with this steps right there, which then in turn overlap with this wall right there, etc., etc. So then from there, right, if we go to that menu, we could go to shaded. Ta-da! Right, now that's the. I want to say that this is more or less the default view, right? Again, it just depends little by little on your modeling style. Most of the time, 80% of the time, I will be working on shaded, maybe 70%, because there's also the render, right? The render view, right, gives us a renderized preview, right, of what this object, of the object that we have in front of you, of us, right? Now, this render view is not technically, right, a full-on render from Rhino. For that, there's a specific set of tools that we use, right, under render tools, right? But this is a render preview, which you can see that right now there's no materials applied to this, okay? And we're only working, right, with this default render material, which is sort of this soft white and this very nice shadows that this new version has added to, right? But we start getting a more realistic view of whatever objects we're working with, right? If you see from this shaded view to this render, right? Sort of if you're working with clay, right, or some of raw material. From there, right, we go to the ghosted view, right, which I also enjoy a lot working with, because it allows us to see through the objects right there, and it allows us to see perhaps some things that are hidden behind another object. Right, so this is our ghosted view. All right, X-ray, sort of a combination of ghosted and wireframe. Technical view, right, and right now this color it gets a little bit lost. All right, maybe I can darken this a little bit so we can see it. Right. Technical. This talks a little bit about technical drawing, right? Your hidden lines, right? These are objects that are behind us, right? But what's really neat about this is that it gets updated automatically, right? As you rotate on your model, right? This view style gets updated. Artistic. Right now, sort of working with different medium, right, such as a watercolor paper, or just a texture right there on the background, and kind of like this inked look right there. Pen, Arctic, which I think this is sort of new from this version, and ray traced, which this is definitely new from the Rhino last version, which is Rhino 5. This is now Rhino 6, right? This is, if I'm not mistaken, I was watching a video, right? And now this is sort of a combination of, or this is a full-on, almost a full-on rendering, right? And you'll see that there's this bar right here. This is rendering, right? Now, the moment that I start rotating, if I'm not mistaken, this is going to reset, right? Because it's going to start a full-on new rendering once I have decided on that view. Right. To be honest with you, I haven't really used that too much yet, but it's a great new setting for this version. I'm going to go back to shaded. And again, as you heard me right now, I'm working with Rhino 6. And that's actually something very important to note. I want to say that it came out probably early this year, 2018, late 2017. I know there was a beta version of this, and I bring this up, right, because there's a lot of really nice improvements on this version, right, version 6, that if you are working on Rhino 5, right, you might be missing out. You're definitely missing out some really. All right, guys, and as I was saying, right, definitely try to get the latest version of Rhino, right? Rhino 6, which again, you'll see that that's what we're using. Not to say if you're a Mac user, right? Things are drastically different, right? I think in essence, right, the spirit of things remain the same. Definitely the interface, which is how the software looks, right? This window, all of this looks different on Mac. And some of the commands look different, and there are, last time I checked, certain limitations definitely on the Mac side of things. You know, the Windows version has been around for quite a bit. The Mac version, fully developed, right, I guess you could say, was just previously released, again, probably last year or this year, early this year. So some drastic changes and differences right there. Right. So, and I'll upload this file so that you can use it as well, or just reference it as I go through this introduction. Right. So again, the most important thing to learn for right now, it's the use of surfaces, poly surfaces, right? Your view styles right here, right? The idea of this multi-view, right? And as you can see, the view styles, right, affect, right, or are applied to the viewport only, right? So this front, I can have a render view. This top, I can have it as an X-ray, and this right view maybe as a ghosted. Right, and of course I have my perspective in the perspective view. Now, how do we know, right? It's important that we recognize, right, the interface. How do we know which viewport you're working on? If you see right now, I click somewhere inside of the top view, this tab gets highlighted blue. Click somewhere on the perspective, right? This gets highlighted, right? Because again, you might be applying something, right, or working or drawing, more importantly, thinking that you're referencing a viewport, but you're actually working off of another one, right? And especially when we start doing camera setups and other features, right, it's important to know which viewport we are working on. So remember, each of these little boxes, right, it's a viewport, right? The way that I think about it, right, it's having, right, a number of cameras, right, different location, different positions, right, on the screen. So you have your camera from top down, that will give you your top view, right? Front view, you have a camera facing straight the model, right, and so forth. And actually, I can show you guys each of these by bringing on the camera, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves, right? Now, those are surfaces and poly surfaces, right? And again, these are the objects that we're going to work with here. Now, in order to develop this or draw these, you actually can start before that with something that is called curves, right? Curves, right? All right. So again, let me perhaps go into this shaded view right here, right? Maximize this, and now I'm back on my top view, right? What do we mean by curves, right? Curves, right, perhaps you might think about it, right, or will help, right, think about it as a line, right? And you actually go ahead and type line, right? Enter, your key, enter key, or spacebar, right? So line, enter, line, spacebar, same, and I'm gonna go over this in a minute, right? I click, and I click. I have a line segment. Now, those you can start recognizing right here from how they look, right, visually or graphically on your menu, right? All of this right here that don't have this shaded blue, right, those are curves, right? So I'll go through them, right? A polyline, right? Right, gives you that segment right there. You know, again, how do we move, right? Kind of like the sheet of paper. If you right click, right, you get this little hand right there. You click and drag with your right mouse, right button of your mouse right there. That gives you that pan action. Right, so we drew a line, we drew a polyline right there, and the difference, right, is of course the the number of segments that you can draw with one single active command, right? But this right here are curves. Now I know that perhaps convenient speaking, right, or as we will recognize a curve, right, they have perhaps they look something like this, right? I mean, that's curved, right? But for the purposes of Rhino, any line segment, right, I'm going to double click on my top, I'm going to go on my perspective view right there, I'm going to zoom into this, right? Any one of these, right, are considered a curve, right? Even, right, some of these closed objects, right, such as this box, rectangle, square, right, whatever it might be, they are referenced as a curve, right? And again, if you reference, right, your object properties panel right here, and you look into the type, it says that it's a closed curve. Select that object right there, it's an open curve. Okay, I'm go back to my top view, top right there. And from there, right, we work with on what's called extrusions, right? Extrude, in this case, we want to extrude a curve, which that's the abbreviation, right? Extrude CRV, right? Select that curve right there. Press the spacebar to tell the software enter, right? And those are extrusions. Press the spacebar to repeat the last command. All right, that's another extrusion. And we have another extrusion. And you can see how you can start getting poly surfaces out of the curves, right? And even in this case, right, a closed poly surface out of, again, a curve. And again, this will all make much more sense, right, as we go through the exercises and through the number of lessons that we have for Rhino. Okay, now you're going to see that navigation, and by navigation I mean the way that you move through the digital world, it changes and varies from your perspective to your orthogonal views, which are your top, front, right, or bottom, back, and left. Okay, what do I mean? If I press and drag my right button of my mouse right on my top view, right, or my front or right, I do what's called panning. I pan and move my drawing, let's call it surface, or my drawing area, right? Now, if I do that on my perspective, what happens? I rotate, right? You get that little orbit sign right there, right? And that's the same button, right? So again, right click drag on my orthogonal views, I pan. Right click drag on my perspective, I rotate, right? I can go all around. On rotating, it does matter where you place your cursor, right? Since that's the center of rotation, right? You see that you move inwards or outwards from such point, right? And it's really cool that you can see things from far away, flying, underneath, hyper closed or zoomed in. All right, now I'm trying to fix my view right here, but rotation, it's not sometimes enough, right? We need to also be able to pan on our 3D view perspective, right? So the way that we do that, right, if we hold, right, the key shift and we right click drag, we pan on our perspective view, right? Shift, right click, pan. Go ahead and try that. Try that you can pan, right? Pan on 3D, right? But here we don't need to do that on our orthogonal views, because we already can pan just with that right click and drag. Right, so that's navigation, something that again you get more comfortable with and familiarize yourself, right? How to rotate, zoom, right? Zoom in and out. That works the same both on perspective and orthogonal views, and that's your scroll, right? Your little wheel of your mouse. And again, it matters where your pointer is placed, right? If I place my pointer over here, I'm going to zoom towards that point, right? So I zoom out. Now if I place my pointer right there, I'm going to zoom towards the center of that object. And I can even go through it and completely past it, right? And if I rotate, now I should be on the back of that object. Which sometimes it's very easy to get lost in space, right? Sort of like that, right? And you have no idea where you are, right? You have no idea where you are. That was my dryer right there, and the multitasking here, right? But we're lost in space. If that ever happens to you, right, we can go to this option right here, zoom extents, and it'll show you everything that is on your screen, right? That's good, default button to have located, right? Zoom extents, right? And again, it will work on the viewport that you're active on, right? So if I want to zoom extents on my right, it applied to my perspective. Why? Because my perspective is active. I click on my right viewport, click on zoom extents, and there we go. It zooms to all the extents, and this is very helpful because, believe it or not, sometimes we draw stuff without noticing or fully realizing that we're doing so, and we get some objects way, way out there. And remember, this place is infinitely big. I mean, we can have stuff as much as we want. You can see how easy it is to lose track of space, where we are. Next thing you know, you think there's nothing in this drawing right there, right? But if we go out here, click, we zoom, select it. I mean, zoom extends, okay? That's what this icon represent, right? It's a magnifying glass pointing to the four corners that it's going to find everything that it's on your drawings area. Okay, so that's zoom, right? We talked about pan, rotation, and zoom, right? That's your basic navigation, right? In software. I mean, in this software in particular. Okay, so go ahead, right, with this same model that I have provided for you guys, right? Go ahead and play with that, right? Try, right, rotating around perhaps this object right there, right? Zoom in, out, zoom in, right? And again, play with the position of your cursor, right? Because it matters both on rotation, of course, on zoom as well, and also on your pan, right? I mean, where you position your little hand right there, right? So again, remember, that's the pan option for the 3D. Since these are 2D drawings, right, or 2D views, we don't rotate on them, right? We could, but we would get out of the technicality of this orthogonal view, which is key for us, particularly again in the architecture realm, right, or the world of architecture. These orthogonal views are very, very important for us. This is what then turn into your elevation, etc., etc. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, so go ahead and try it, right? Rotate and navigate a little bit with this file, and we'll come back and we'll talk more about this entire window that we have here, because there's some really, really important things to take note of. And I'll go ahead and pause this. All right, guys. So we are back, right? Hopefully you feel comfortable navigating a little bit now in this model right here and in this software. I mentioned that we will take a closer look into the Rhino screen. Okay, so we can start from the top. Right, this bar right here, this is called your title bar. You'll see that this is where the name of your file is, the version, right, that you're using of Rhino, right? In this case, I have called this model, right, Rhino Intro model. And you see that I'm using an educational version. Okay. And this is helpful because as you work with multiple files, you'll have different versions, different options of one same perhaps project, and you start naming them with different names. And perhaps you might be working on a file that you were not intending to work, and that's important that you keep an eye on, right? That this is the right file. So it gives you right there the name, right, of that file. And the size, apparently, which is actually very helpful. Not bad at all. Underneath that, we have the menu bar, which is very standard, right, for any Windows software, right? You know, very, very typical, right? Your file, edit, view. From there, it starts going into very specific Rhino categories, such as your curve, solid, surface, solid, mesh, etc., etc. Right. Again, familiarize yourself a little bit with what's in there. Right. All of these are different options that you have to draw a number of objects, draw a number of curves, surfaces, solids, meshes, etc., etc. Dimensioning, adding dimensions to your drawings. Transformation tools, analyze tools, rendering tools, how to open up your panels right there, which are these guys that we have to the right, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, underneath your menu bar, right, you have one of the most iconic characteristics of Rhino, which is your command prompt line, right, or your simply referred to as your command line, right? Now, this command line is how you communicate with the software. And as you can see, right, this is blinking, right, meaning that it's in a way waiting for us, right? There's nothing on it right now, and it's waiting for us to introduce a command. Commands are how we communicate with the software. If you are familiar with the Autodesk AutoCAD, you definitely have used commands, right? And what's neat about this, if you know AutoCAD, is a lot of those commands are the same in Rhino, such as line, right, trim, circle, right, rectangle, etc., etc. And you see, I begin typing my command, and this drop-down menu appears, letting me know all the possible commands that start with that RE letter. If I continue, right, this command, right, I know I want a rectangle, I type REC, right, you see that the list narrows down, right, from there, E, right, A, etc., etc. At any point, I don't actually have to finish that command. I can just either enter with my keyboard, I'm going to skip to exit from there, or I can use my arrows to navigate through these options, right, and select the one again that I want to use, right, enter. I'm going to skip, right, and that's how your commands work. Now, above of this command prompt line, you see that there's this text right there. This is your command history, and I'll talk about it more later on, but that's actually something really important because it keeps track of everything that you have done, and we can open it by pressing the key function 2. This is a transcript of all the actions that the software has performed since it was created. That's the right term. Right? So this is a transcript of all the actions that we have performed so far on this, and we'll see how later on this is very helpful so that we can actually trace back some of our steps and maybe troubleshoot some issues. Right, so I'm going to click that, and that's your command history. Moving on our Rhino screen, right, we have our standard tools right here, right, and our tab toolbars. Again, you'll see that you recognize some of these, right, already from here, right, such as a render tool. We have renders over here. Again, you'll hear me say how it's really interesting that there's not just one single way of doing something, but there's more than 2, 3, 4, sometimes ways that you can actually do the same thing, right? Whether it be through menus, through tabs, through icons, or commands, right? Actually writing down the word. So tab toolbars, we'll see that also I work through this, right? So you can click on these different tabs. Notice that if I scroll, right, I go through them as well. Right, sometimes that perhaps throw us off, right? Because you'll see that your tabs will look different than mine. Let's say that I'm working on set view and you're at curve tools. And again, perhaps it's because you have scrolled through them because without noticing that. I know that happens to me sometimes, right? So scroll through those. Right? I like to have them under standard, like that. And our standard, again, these are all very, very helpful. Again, these are some of the most used ones, right? New file, open, save, print, right? Document properties or options, etc., etc. We talked about some extents, right? Etc. We have our site main, right? Our sidebar, which again, very typical of Rhino. If you've used AutoCAD as well, again, I remember that perhaps older versions. I know this was also very a standard, right? Very typical of AutoCAD to have this left menu right here, right? So that's your sidebar, which again, sometimes you lose it, etc., etc. I'll show you guys how to bring it back up. Right? All of these are what's called dockable. Right? That means that you can actually float them. You know, that's called a dock. Right? Docking your toolbar. This is a sidebar that is floating, right? Because it's just moving around. I'd say for right now, try to leave it standard because a lot of the tutorials perhaps that you might run into or right now they're learning to use this standard. Later on, you can definitely customize your working environment. Sidebar, we talked about our viewports. That's basically our main area, right, of work. That's where we see everything that we're doing, everything that we have on our model. Viewport titles. Again, these are standard by default from Rhino. You can actually have any sort of viewports with all sorts of names. Grid axis, right? We have the axis on all of these drawings right there, along with our world coordinate, right? X, Y, Z, the 3 coordinates, right, of our working environment. If you have done any math, right, perhaps trigonometry or even calculus, right, you're familiar, right, with these charts, right, the X, the Y, and the Z, which again we use to reference our objects in Rhino. Next or underneath we have our viewport tabs, and again we can either select our from going to the front viewport title, or right we can switch from viewports, right, by clicking on this viewport tabs. And again, if I scroll through them using my mouse wheel, I switch from them. So there you go. I see a lot of students that actually do use this, right? It's more of a habit. It's a habit of mine, right? Using this right here, whatever works from you. Now, really important, right? Underneath that, we have our OSnap tool, our OSnap toolbar, right? Which is this guy right here. I will talk more in depth about what each of these are, right? They are drafting tools and modeling tools. Very, very, very helpful, right? And near point, etc. So our OSnap toolbars, and underneath that we have our status bar, which is the last section of this, which is where we turn on and off certain settings, right? Grid snap, ortho, planar. We know about units. In this case, I'm working with feet, layers, right? coordinate wherever we place our cursor. You'll see that there's a specific coordinate right there, etc., etc. All right, guys. So that's the Rhino Screen. All right. On page 15 of the Rhino training manual, there is a diagram, right, with all of these parts that you can, for your reference, right, perhaps flag it on your training manual, or even copy it onto your notes. Okay, so let's I'll let you guys just familiarize yourself a little bit with this Rhino screen, and we'll meet back in a couple of seconds. Okay, I'm gonna pause this. All right, guys, and so we're back. All right, again, going over the Rhino interface. We talked about the Rhino screen. Toolbars, right? Again, these toolbars have different options, right, or subcategories, right? Surface, plane, corner to corner, 3 points, etc., etc. So that means there are further actions to discover right there. You get tooltips, right? Meaning that if I place my cursor on top of any of these icons, right, I get a little pop-up window right there telling me what the name of this icon is, right? Now, you'll also see, right, this little triangle right there underneath certain icons, right? That means that there's what's called a cascading toolbar, meaning that that same icon has other actions that we can play with, right? So there's a point right there. Well, there's a number of options or commands that we can actually perform under the point tool. Right? So if I again place my cursor on top of any of these icons, we get the name of them. Also, it's called hovering over the icon. Now, you may be asking yourself, how come some of these icons right here, they have, example, that one has ellipse from center. Now, if I go to the icon above, right, this one actually has two options, right? Control point curve or curve through points. What does that mean? Well, that actually means that this icon can be activated, right, both with a right or left click. A left click will give us a control point curve. A right click will give us a curve through points, right? So in this case, I'll do a left click, right? The command is active, right? We can see it right here in our command line. It's waiting for us to perform an action, which is draw points. Right there, enter, or I can go back to the same icon and then now use the curve through points, which is the right click. I go ahead and do that. Right? Select points to build a curve. Oops. We actually need points in order to do that. Right. Now I select curve. Right, and again, don't worry about following necessarily along right now. I just want to show you guys the capabilities of this software, right? Trust me, you'll be flying through this in no time. But right now it's sort of that slow introduction, right? I mean, just showing you more so than you actually working with the software, but just bear with the basics, right? And it definitely does pay off. Okay. Let me just finish this right there so that maybe it stays graphically on our screen. There, it gives us a preview. And here one more time, and we have those curves for those points right there. Okay. Cascading toolbars, tooltips, the graphics area right here. Our tabbed panels, these are really, really important, right? Anything from layers to properties, notifications. What else do we have here? A lot of stuff, even a calculator, right? Very, very helpful. Materials, right, etc., etc., all of which of course have a different role, and again, some of them we use more than the other ones, right? You can arrange this in different ways, right? You can even float them right here so that they're somewhere movable, right? If you're working with dual screens, right, you can drag it to a different screen. You can dock it right there by dragging it right there if I release it, or you can simply just get rid of it, right? Okay, guys. Now the mouse, right? As you've been able to tell, 3D modeling, particularly with Rhino, it's a huge advantage to be working with the mouse. You can, yes, you can work with the trackpad. In this case, I'm working actually off of a laptop, but I have a wireless mouse and keyboard connected, right? Again, you'll hear me say, right, in classes, you know, just constantly saying, make sure that you get yourself a mouse, get yourself a mouse. The reality is that you can, right? You can work without a mouse, but it's just slower. It slows you down, right? And just because you're able to do it doesn't mean that it's the most efficient way of doing it, right? So definitely having a mouse, it's makes a difference, right? And again, you definitely use the 3 standard buttons of a mouse, right? Which is your left click, right click, or your middle wheel, right? And I'll talk about that in a second, what some of those different buttons do. From there, definitely you can customize this. You can have a more dynamic mouse with more buttons. You can add functions to those. You can have ergonomic mouse, etc., etc. This all comes little by little as you see fit, right? You get better at 3D modeling, drafting, whatnot, and those needs become apparent. Okay, now that's the mouse. Now we talked about entering commands, right? Entering commands is again how we communicate with the software, right? So I can type M-O-V-E. That means move, right? Now, how do I tell the software that I'm done entering a command? There is actually a couple of ways. The first ones that I'll talk about will be enter and spacebar. Enter and spacebar in this software right here that we're working with, they're basically the same. And also, if you have used AutoCAD, you'll recognize right away. And don't quote me on this, but I want to say that the fact of this is the spacebar is just so accessible. Right? It's the largest, for the most part, the largest button on our keyboard, right? So if I press spacebar, the command move is activated. Then I can select the object that I want to move. Select objects to move. Press enter when done. Remember, enter in this case can be enter, your enter key. Right, and then the command is activated. I can move from that point to this point. Or it can actually be your spacebar. Now, if I press spacebar one more time, I repeat the last command that I did, or enter. Okay, which is very, very important, right? Enter and spacebar perform the same function, which is enter or repeat the last command that we worked on. Okay, now we can add another enter command, which is your right click. Okay, so in this case, right, select objects to move, right, because that was the last command that we used right there. Select it, right click as an enter, and then we can move those objects right there. Okay, and we talked about the autocomplete, right? MOV, right, means it gives us everything that has some MOV on its name. Okay, now another button, another key that you will be constantly hitting will be the escape key, right? That's, again, standard, and that's how you cancel, right? You exit out of a command. So yes, right? Escape, escape, escape. That's how we work with that. And again, remember repeating commands. How can we repeat commands, right? We can either do right click, I'm going to escape. We can do spacebar, I'm going to escape, or we can do enter. Either of the enters, okay? You might be working with the keyboard that has the enter, the standard enter, or the enter from your numbers to the right of the keyboard, right? So both of them are enter. Okay. And lastly, right, we talked about our panels. And the panels are multiple, there's a number of things, rendering, libraries, all of that. You'll see that the two default ones that I have are my layers and my properties, right? If you do not have them, I will actually get rid of these right here so that I can show you how to insert them. Modifications, this, close this, and close this. Okay, panels, layers, panels, properties, object properties. Right? How do we dock them? All right, click and drag on the name title bar. You'll see it highlights blue. Right? There we go. That has been docked. Right? I can drag my object properties one right here. Now, if I drop it, there's going to be parallel to it like that. I don't want that. It takes up more space on my screen. I actually want it underneath it, right? So I keep going, right? And actually, there we go, right? That's it. We can actually adjust this right here. Right, how much space we want to give it. Right? I mean, you most likely don't want to have this, right? Because you want to have as much or use as much as your screen space for actually what 3D modeling, right? And these settings right here, or drafting, modeling it, they're auxiliary, but definitely. And again, sometimes we might have really long layer names or whatnot, or information that we want to see. We might temporarily drag it, right, and be able to see more, but then usually want to bring it back there, to that area rather. Okay, guys. So let's pause for a little bit, right? Let you maybe go back, add to your notes, maybe questions that you might have. Make sure that you write them down so that we can address them, either in class or through messages. And we will come back so that we can start working on our first exercise. Okay, see you guys in a minute. All right, guys. So we continue on this Rhino introduction, right? And make our way to the first exercise, exercise number 1. And I want to make walk you guys through working with this exercises, right? How to get started with this. Okay. Here I have the first file that you'll be using open. I'm going to show you guys how to get here. First, remember that we're working with the Rhino Training Manual Level 1, right, which you have downloaded from online. Remember, it's linked on your syllabus, and I'll add a link somewhere on this video. Right now, once you have unzipped that, and again, I'll create another video, right, on how to unzip this. Right, we did this last class. You should get this folder right here, right, which has primarily 2 things, right, the models. Right, models, and right, your Rhino training manual. Okay, now these models, these are the files that the manual is going to reference. Okay, so let's open up the training manual. By the way, everything that I covered on that first video, it's this introduction, right? All of these pages up to page 23. Okay, that first Rhino introduction. Now we get to this point right here, exercise 1. Let me go ahead and zoom this, right? Open this up. Exercise 1, Rhino basics, right? To get started, download the level 1 training models. You have, right? Unzip the downloaded file into a level 1 folder on your computer, right? We should. Right. After downloading the level 1 training zip file to your computer, unzip files into a level 1 folder located in your desktop or my documents or another location in which you have full rights, including, right, in this case, your thumb drive, right, your USB drive, which, I mean, ideally that's what you're working with. if you're working at the school's lab, or if you're working on your laptop, definitely, you know, it can be your documents or your desktop, whichever one you find easier to locate. From the File menu, click Open. In the Open dialog box, navigate to the Level 1 folder and open the model Start. Now that's the important part right there. Start that 3DM. Right now, you're gonna see that .3dm, right? That's the those are the files, Rhino files, right? And you see this model contains 5 objects: a cube, a cone, a cylinder, a sphere, and rectangular plate. So what this is basically telling us, right, is to go to Rhino. I'm gonna go ahead and actually close it. Need to install updates, not right now because we're working with this, right? But let's go to File. Open, right? And actually, this is something that I don't enjoy so much about this. I actually want to keep this file open. Let's say save changes to this. I'm gonna say no, right? Because I'm gonna share this file with you guys. Now we navigate right to where you have right the level 1 training. Double click on that. Now we go to models, and what file are we looking for? Start.3dm. Well, if you have this alphabetically organized, right, very easy to, and if you don't, right, you can just click on these tabs right here, right, we can navigate towards F, G, L, N, right, R, S, start, right, you can select that file right there, open, and now we have the same that the training manual has. Right? From the view menu, click viewport layout and then click for viewports, right? So this is now the beginning, right, of the exercises, right? And we go through this, right? And this is basically what you'll be going through, right? Finishing, right, some of this exercise, right? The course will guide you through which ones to complete, and perhaps some of the instructions will vary, right? So please make sure that you verify and check with your instructor, right? I further expand on these exercises for actually you guys to submit, right? So always keep an eye on that before you actually submit, right? So in this case, this is the file that you have. Now, let's get to the habit, and let's get to a habit right here of actually not overriding, right, these models right here. So within your level 1 training folder, let's actually create a new folder, right, new folder, right, and let's actually call this folder My Models. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to leave the models inside of this models folder as they are, and you then want to save a new copy of such models onto your My Models. Let me show you what I mean, right? So this is the start, right, file. You're going to be doing a number of actions, right? At this moment I cannot recall, right? I'll guide you through some exercises, right? All the way up to this point, right, where it's kind of like the now you try it kind of thing. And we're asked you to build something using these objects, kind of like as if you were using Legos, right? Right here. Try it on your own, right? Once you have finished this, right, and of course, please do go through all these steps right here, right? I mean, you do allow yourself this opportunity to actually learn the content slowly at your own pace, right? So don't skip anything. And usually, whenever we get lost, it's mostly because we skip the step, sometimes without really noticing. Okay, so whenever you get to this point right there and you have done this part of the exercise, right, whenever you're done, let's say, with the file, right, and not all the files, you use some files differently, right, but whenever it does ask you to, save it, right, or whenever you're ready to save, right, let's go to File and let's do what's called a Save As so that we don't overwrite the file that we have here. See, because if you go to File, Save, you're just going to save all those changes that you did. Okay? And again, as a habit, you do want to keep a copy of the original file and then a copy of the file that you have worked on, right? So let's do a File, Save As. Right, now let's go back to that models level 1 root folder, and rather than going to your models, let's go into My Models, because this is now your My Start, right? So we should call this, right, Start, right, Let's do underscore and let's do your initials, right? In this case, right, JMM, right? Rhino 6 model. That's the right format, right? I'm going to talk more about saving later on, right? But three things always that I mention is you want to keep track of your location. That is where this file is going to be located. This is the address of that, right? Desktop, level 1 folder under my models folder. The name that you actually have, the name of the exercise, underscore your initials. Lastly, the type, which again, it should be standard, right? .3dm. You shouldn't have to change it, but do keep an eye on that it does not change on you. Let's go ahead and click save. And let me show you what I mean by that. If I go back to this folder right here, right? So I have models. These are all the models that you downloaded online. And if you go to my models, you'll see that there should only be how many files in this? One. Right? And it's a good way to keep track of all the exercises that you have successfully completed. Right? In this case, start has been completed, or that means that you have actually performed an action on this file. Okay, so let's do that. Right? I'll let you guys work on the, I think we're on page 25 if I'm not mistaken, right? 26 maybe, right? All right, so let's go back to page 26, right? Remember, if you have the dual screen, working on the dual screen, this works very nice because you can actually float these windows right here, getting something like this. If you're not, you can try to do something like this, right? Which I've also seen some students do. You know, you little by little will develop your what works for you. Now, the only thing with this is that, of course, you see that your space gets limited right there, or if you want to just you know, work minimizing and maximizing screens. That's Elvis right there. Yeah, it's okay. Hey Elvis. Alright guys, let me go ahead and minimize this. And again, if you're working on school, you have any questions, you know, raise your hand, I can stop by. If not, you know, make sure that you email me, message me, and there you go guys. This is the start of your 3D modeling experience. Alright guys.